This isn't happening. Rain streaking down floor-to-ceiling glass. Seoul's skyline bleeds gray and silver beyond the penthouse window. Jennifer stands at the edge of the room, forest green velvet against a world of cold steel. She doesn't move. She barely breathes. 3 days ago, I was closing a $100 million deal in a boardroom. I wore power like a second skin. I knew every leverage point, every exit strategy. She turns slowly. Her long waves fall over one shoulder. Her eyes, sharp, unbroken, scan the immaculate penthouse that is now her cage. Now I have none. The law office, 48 hours earlier, sterile, cold, a contract on a glass table, the signature line marked in ink so dark it looks like blood. Jennifer. Controlled, voice tight. You can't do this. I'm not a transaction. Suited man. Sliding the contract forward. Your father signed first, Ms. Smith. You're simply... The final clause. Jennifer's jaw tightens. She looks at the paper, then, slow pan up. She looks across the room. Kyung Sook stands against the far wall. Black shirt, black tie. Tattoos climbing his neck like a language only violence understands. He doesn't sit. He doesn't pace. He simply exists in the room, and somehow, that is the most dangerous thing in it. His eyes find hers. He does not smile. He has never smiled. And somehow that is worse than anything he could have said. Kyung Sook. Quiet. Devastatingly quiet. It's done. You belong to my world now. Jennifer, lifting her chin, refusing to flinch. I don't belong to anyone. He tilts his head, the only movement he makes. His eyes drop briefly to the contract, then back to her. A pause that lasts exactly long enough to make her heart stutter. Kyung Sook. We'll see. The penthouse. Jennifer, perched on the cold marble counter, the Seoul skyline gray and endless behind her. She stares at the space where he stood an hour ago, already gone, already a ghost in his own kingdom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me. He didn't even look at me longer than necessary. She exhales. Slow. Controlled. A negotiator's breath. But somehow, Kyung Sook, the man they call the Ice King, the man who has never once been seen to smile, is the most terrifying thing I have ever faced across a table. Jennifer and I don't yet know that he chose me. Specifically. Deliberately. Long before my father ever signed a single page. The rain intensifies. Somewhere in the penthouse, a door closes. Soft and precise, and Jennifer knows without looking. He's watching. Jennifer. I thought I was walking into a prison. Her eyes drift to the window, to the city, to the freedom on the other side of the glass. Jennifer. I didn't realize I was walking into the one place in Seoul where no one would ever be allowed to hurt me again. Kyung Sook's reflection barely visible in the darkened glass, standing behind her, still, unsmiling, watching. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The call came on a Tuesday. Jennifer was mid-sentence in a conference room on the 42nd floor, walking 3 senior partners through a acquisition strategy she'd spent 6 weeks building, when her assistant appeared in the doorway with a face that said, "Everything has already fallen apart." Jennifer finished her sentence anyway. That was who she was, the kind of woman who landed the plane even when the engines were gone. But there was no landing this. By noon, the firm's accounts were frozen. By 2 o'clock, men in suits she didn't recognize were walking the corridors with clipboards, cataloging assets like the building was already someone else's. By 4, her father called. She almost didn't answer. She wishes now that she hadn't. Jenny. His voice was thin, careful in a way that told her the damage was already done. There's a contract. You need to sign it. What kind of contract, Dad? Silence. The particular silence of a man who has already made his choice and is only now finding the words to explain it to the person he sacrificed. The kind that keeps this family alive. The law office was on the 58th floor of a building with no signage on the street. The elevator required a key card she was handed without explanation. The room itself was immaculate, all glass and gray marble, the kind of sterile elegance that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with control. A single document sat on the table, centered with architectural precision. The signature lines were printed in ink so dark it looked like something had bled onto the page. Jennifer read every word. She was a negotiator. She always read every word, and every word told her the same thing. She had no leverage. Her father's name was already on the third page, the signature slightly uneven, the pen pressed too hard, the handwriting of a man who had been afraid. She looked up. Across the room, partially turned toward the window, stood a man she recognized only from whispered warnings passed between people who never wanted to say his name too loudly. Kyung Sook. He was taller than she'd imagined, dressed entirely in black, shirt, tie, the dark fabric pulled across broad shoulders with a precision that made clothing look like armor. Tattoos climbed the column of his neck in dense, deliberate patterns, ancient and violent, a record of a life she couldn't read. He held a glass of water and had not touched it. He was looking at the city below with the patience of someone who had never once been made to wait for anything. He didn't turn around when she picked up the pen. He didn't need to. Jennifer signed her name in one clean stroke and set the pen down without a sound. Only then did he turn. His face was exactly what the rumors had promised. Sharp-jawed, dark-eyed, perfectly still. No satisfaction in his expression, no cruelty, no warmth. Nothing at all, in fact, except a kind of focused, absolute attention that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. He crossed the room slowly, picked up the contract and looked at her signature for exactly 3 seconds. "You didn't hesitate," he said. His voice was low and even, the words arriving without urgency. "Hesitating wouldn't have changed anything," Jennifer said. Something moved behind his eyes, not a smile, not close, but a flicker of something she couldn't name. Then it was gone. He set the contract down, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the door. "A car is waiting," he said. "Don't bring anything you're not willing to leave behind." The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a tower in Gangnam, 60 stories above the street, above the noise, above the world Jennifer had known. Floor-to-ceiling windows on every wall, marble floors the color of winter fog, furniture that was beautiful the way weapons are beautiful, precise, purposeful, cold to the touch. A woman named Minna showed her to a room with a closet already filled with clothes in her size, her colors, her style. Jennifer stood in the doorway and understood that he had known for some time exactly what she would need. The thought settled in her chest like a stone. She tested the doors that evening, not dramatically, just quietly, professionally, the way she'd assess any negotiation space. The main elevator required a code she didn't have. The stairwell door opened but triggered a soft chime somewhere in the building. By the time she'd made it back to the living room, a man in a dark suit was already positioned near the entrance, eyes forward, expression neutral. He didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. She was being watched with the same quiet efficiency as everything else in this tower, completely and without apology. Dinner arrived at 7:30. A formal table set for 2, overlooking a Seoul evening that had turned the color of bruised silk. Jennifer sat. She waited. And then Kyung Sook appeared from the corridor, jacket removed, sleeves still precisely rolled, and took his seat across from her as though they had done this 100 times. He ate in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, not the kind that needed filling, the kind that belonged to someone who had spent so long in rooms where words were dangerous that quiet had become his native language. Jennifer decided to speak. "You don't have to babysit me through dinner," she said pleasantly. "I'm not going to steal the silverware." Nothing. A slight movement of his jaw. He lifted his glass. "I've negotiated contracts in 4 countries," she continued. "I've walked into rooms where people wanted to destroy me and walked out with everything I came for. I'm not someone who frightens easily." He set his glass down and looked at her then, directly, with that same focused, total attention from the law office. She kept her expression steady. She was proud of that. "I know," he said. 2 words, delivered without elaboration, and without invitation for follow-up. He returned to his meal. Jennifer studied him across the table. "Is there anything I'm actually permitted to do here, or just permitted to exist?" "You're permitted to be safe," he said without looking up. "In my world, that's not a small thing." She wanted to argue. She had 17 arguments already constructed. But something in the way he said it, not as a comfort, but as a simple weathered fact, made her swallow them all and reach for her wine instead. They finished the meal without another word exchanged. She found the file on a Thursday afternoon. She hadn't been snooping, or not exactly. She'd been walking the penthouse the way she walked every space, methodically, learning its geometry, mapping exits and habits and patterns. His office door had been left slightly open. She'd pushed it wider. I told herself she was simply curious about the view from that window. The desk was immaculate, 1 monitor, 1 leather portfolio, and a physical folder, manila, unremarkable, sitting beside the portfolio as though it had been set down and simply not moved. She shouldn't have opened it. She opened it. Her own face looked back at her from a photograph clipped to the inside cover. A candid shot. She was mid-stride on a sidewalk somewhere, coffee in hand, laughing at something off camera. She had no memory of that moment, no memory of anyone nearby. Behind the photograph, pages, her educational record, her early career, deal summaries from negotiations she'd led, annotated in his handwriting, precise and angular, noting her strategies, her patterns, her instincts. Industry articles with her name in them, marked. A timeline of her career going back 7 years, assembled with the thoroughness of someone who had been paying very close attention for a very long time. Jennifer's hands were steady. She was trained for steadiness. But her mind was moving fast now, pulling the thread. The firm targeted so specifically, the contract arranged so cleanly, the closet full of exactly her sizes, the dinner served at exactly the time she would have chosen herself. He hadn't simply accepted this arrangement. He had engineered it. She closed the folder and placed it exactly as she'd found it. Walked out of the office, pulled the door back to its original angle, returned to her room and sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap and the city glittering 60 stories below. She had walked into this tower believing she was a piece moved by someone else's hand. She was beginning to understand that Kyung Sook, the man who never smiled, who spoke in monosyllables and watched her like she was the only thing in any room worth watching, had been pulling her toward this long before she'd ever heard his name. The question that kept her awake that night wasn't whether she should be afraid. It was why, knowing what she now knew, she wasn't. She found him at 2 a.m. She hadn't been able to sleep, hadn't really slept properly since the law office, since the folder, since the slow unraveling of every assumption she'd carried into this tower. She'd been lying in the dark running calculations that led nowhere, and finally gave up, pulled on a robe, and walked toward the kitchen for water. He was already there. This was a different Kyung Sook than the one who sat across dinner tables and signed documents and filled rooms with the weight of his silence. His black shirt was open at the collar, the first 2 buttons undone, his sleeves pushed up past the tattoos on his forearms. He was standing at the counter with a glass of something amber, not drinking it, just holding it, staring at the rain moving down the glass in long silver threads. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who was tired. He heard her. He always heard everything, but he didn't turn around. Jennifer crossed the kitchen and filled a glass with water and leaned against the opposite counter and looked at him openly, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before. "You don't sleep," she said. Not a question. "Not much." He still hadn't turned. Not for a long time. She waited. In negotiations, silence was a tool. In this kitchen, at this hour, it felt like something else, like the space between two people deciding whether to be honest with each other. "The file," she said. "In your office. I saw it." A pause. His grip on the glass didn't change. "I know," he said. "You've been watching me for years." "Yes?" The word arrived without defense or decoration, and somehow that was more disarming than any explanation would have been. Jennifer set her water down. "Why?" He turned then. In the low light of the kitchen, with Seoul's rainy skyline behind him and his shirt open at the throat, he looked like something carved from the same dark material as this city. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, which is to say completely and without apology. "Because you walked into a room full of men who wanted you to fail," he said, "and you made them need you instead. I'd never seen anyone do that." His eyes held hers without wavering. "I didn't know what to do with it." Jennifer absorbed that. "So you bought me. I kept you safe." A muscle moved in his jaw. "There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He exhaled, slowly. The way a man exhales when he's been holding something for so long his body has forgotten what it feels like to put it down. "My life," he said quietly, "is nightmares and blood. It has been since I was 17 years old. I don't apologize for what I am." His eyes dropped briefly to the glass in his hand. "But I needed one thing in it that wasn't." The kitchen was very quiet. The rain kept moving down the glass. Jennifer picked up her water, looked at him steadily, and said, "Good night, Kyung Sook." She walked back to her room. She didn't sleep any better. But something in her chest had shifted, some load-bearing wall of her certainty developing its first hairline crack. He let her leave the tower on Saturday. She understood it for what it was, a controlled release, a longer leash, not freedom. Min-ah accompanied her. Two men she'd learned to recognize by the particular way they occupied space followed at a distance that was close enough to be obvious and far enough to be deniable. A third she only spotted once, reflected in a shop window, before he disappeared again. She bought coffee, and she walked through Cheongdam-dong and looked at things she didn't need and let herself pretend, briefly, that the city was still hers the way it used to be. But she saw the way people looked at Min-ah, the way a restaurant host's face changed when he clocked the men near the door. The particular stillness that moved through a room when Kyung Sook's world entered it. She was not a woman moving through Seoul. She was a valuable thing being transported with extreme care. On the ride back, she sat in the black car and watched the city slide past the window and asked herself honestly, for the first time, whether she was angrier about the cage or about the part of her that had started to understand why it existed. She didn't answer herself. She was still working on it. The attack came on a Wednesday evening, without warning, in the way the worst things always do. Jennifer was in the study when the lights cut. Not a flicker, a complete, deliberate severance, the building swallowed by dark in an instant. She was on her feet before the emergency lighting activated, her body making decisions before her mind caught up. Somewhere below, she heard the elevator, movement that shouldn't be happening, too fast, too deliberate. The door to the study opened, and Kyung Sook was there. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put himself between her and the door without a word, and the shift in him was immediate and total. Every trace of the controlled, measured man from the kitchen was gone, replaced by something older and more absolute. His jaw was set. His eyes were scanning. One hand reached back and found her arm, not roughly, but with a grip that said clearly, "You do not move unless I move you." What followed was 11 minutes that Jennifer would never be able to fully reconstruct in the right order. Men in the corridor. Sounds of impact, brief and efficient. Kyung Sook moving her through the penthouse with the practiced precision of someone who had planned for this exact scenario, who had probably planned for it the day she arrived. At one point, a door burst open, and she saw his face in the moment he handled the threat. Not rage, not the theatrical fury she might have expected, but something colder and more complete than rage, something that had long ago made peace with its own violence. It was over before she fully understood it had begun. The penthouse was secured. His men moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency. Kyung Sook stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen, the marble counter, the gray city beyond the glass, and he was breathing harder than she'd ever seen him breathe, and there was a cut along his jaw that was bleeding in a thin, dark line, and he was looking at her with an expression she had no framework for. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She scanned his face. "You are." "It doesn't matter." "It does." She moved toward him before she'd decided to, and he went completely still. The absolute stillness of a man exercising enormous restraint as she reached up and examined the cut with steady hands. He let her. That was the thing that lodged in her chest and stayed there. He let her. "You could have been killed." She said it quietly, not as an accusation. "Yes." He didn't move away from her hands. His voice was low and stripped of its usual precision, like something had worn the edges off it tonight. "That's been true every day for 15 years. Tonight was different. Because of me." He was quiet for a beat. "Because I was afraid. I don't get afraid." His eyes found hers and held. "I haven't been afraid of anything in a very long time." Jennifer lowered her hands. The city gleamed wet and bright behind him. The distance between them was nothing. A foot of marble-cooled air, a rule he'd maintained since the first day. A wall he'd built around himself and around her and called it protection. "Your no-touching rule," she said, "wasn't about you." His jaw tightened. "It was about what I'd become if I let myself stop pretending this was simple." He reached up, slowly, and his hand closed over hers where it had come to rest against his chest. He held it there, just held it, like something precious and long denied. "Nothing about you has ever been simple, Jennifer." She didn't pull away. She didn't want to. "The smile," she said softly. "Is that a rule too?" Something happened to his face then. Not sudden, not dramatic, but a slow dissolution, like ice that has decided at last to trust the warmth. The corner of his mouth moved, small, private, real in a way that none of the steel and silence had ever been. It lasted only a moment, but she had seen it. The meeting happened 10 days later. A long table, rival faction representatives, men who had ordered the breach, who had believed that taking Jennifer would bring Kyung Sook to his knees. They had miscalculated, which, Jennifer was learning, so was the last mistake people tended to make in his world. She sat to his right. Her choice. Her posture was the posture from 100 boardrooms, spine straight, hands still, eyes moving across the table, and reading every face with the fluency of someone who had spent a career knowing exactly what people were hiding. When one of the men across the table looked at her, assessing, dismissive, looking for the weakness she was supposed to represent, she held his gaze and didn't blink until he looked away first. Kyung Sook noticed. He said nothing, but his hand under the table found hers and held it with the same quiet certainty as it had in the kitchen. The rivals left the meeting having conceded 3 territories and a supply corridor. They left looking like men who had arrived expecting to collect a debt and discovered instead that the debt had compounded into something they couldn't afford. In the elevator down, one of Kyung Sook's lieutenants murmured something in Korean. Kyung Sook's reply was brief. The lieutenant glanced at Jennifer with an expression that was new, not the careful blankness of the staff, not the covert assessment of his men, something closer to respect. "What did he say?" Jennifer asked when they were alone. Kyung Sook looked at her, that almost smile again, She was learning to catch it now, the slight shift in his eyes before it reached his mouth. "He said the rivals came expecting to find your weakness," he said. "I told him they found our strength instead." Jennifer looked at the city rising around them as the car moved through Seoul, the city that had tried to reduce her to a clause in someone else's contract, that had handed her, in the same motion, a world she was only beginning to understand. She thought about leverage, about exits, about the particular power of a woman who has stopped trying to escape a room and started learning how to own it. She held onto his hand and didn't let go.